How the American War of Independence destroyed the French monarchy and sparked the French Revolution, with anecdotes, reminiscences, and diary entries. This narrative is proudly brought to you by Polly Speaks For You. At Polly Speaks For You, we are committed to empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through innovative text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You is more than just software. It's a tool for self-expression, connecting people with the world in meaningful ways. By blending the richness of history with cutting-edge technology, Polly Speaks For You demonstrates that every voice, whether preserving the past or shaping the future, has the potential to inspire. While we strive to make the story engaging, our primary focus is on storytelling itself. The visuals are secondary. We're showcasing the remarkable capabilities of text-to-speech software that bring these stories to life. In the late 18th century, two interconnected revolutions, one across the Atlantic in the American colonies and one in France, changed the course of history. France, with its ancient monarchy and rigid social hierarchy, was a world power, yet its involvement in the American War of Independence would inadvertently set the stage for its own collapse. This is the tale of how a distant war, fought for ideals of liberty and equality, helped unravel the very monarchy that had supported it. Diary entry of Marquis de Lafayette. November 1781. We have won a great victory at Yorktown. The British have surrendered, their once great empire humbled by the combined strength of our French troops and the Americans' courage. General Washington is a man of great honor and conviction, but it is the sight of the people, ordinary men fighting for their freedom, that stirs me deeply. They believe in liberty with such fervor, such passion. I cannot help but think of France, my homeland, where the chains of inequality hold our people captive. Could it be that such a fight, such a dream, might take root there too? Lafayette's words captured the spirit of many French soldiers and intellectuals of the time. The ideals of the American Revolution, liberty, equality, and the rejection of tyranny, resonated deeply with those who saw the inequities in French society. But while France's thinkers were inspired by the Americans' quest for freedom, the decision to support the American cause was not initially driven by lofty ideals alone. France's calculated gamble. Why support America? France's involvement in the American War of Independence was not just an ideological alignment with the cause of liberty. It was a calculated political move. For centuries, France and Britain had been bitter rivals, locked in a constant struggle for dominance in Europe and around the world. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, had ended disastrously for France, with significant territorial losses in North America and India. Supporting the American colonists was seen as a way to avenge this defeat and weaken Britain. King Louis XVI, a young and somewhat indecisive monarch, initially hesitated to support the American colonies openly. His ministers, particularly the influential foreign minister Comte de Vergennes, pushed for intervention, seeing it as an opportunity to weaken Britain and restore France's prestige on the global stage. Vergennes believed that a British defeat would allow France to regain its influence and territories in the Americas and beyond. In 1778, France formally entered the war, providing military aid, financial support, and naval power to the American revolutionaries. The French fleet, under Admiral de Grasse, played a crucial role in the decisive victory at Yorktown, where British forces under General Cornwallis were forced to surrender. Reminiscence of Comte de Vergennes. Memoirs, 1785. The decision to support the Americans was not made lightly. We were fully aware that the cost would be great, but the British must be humbled, if not on our own soil, then across the seas. We sent them our ships, our soldiers, and our gold. But the price of revenge is high. The coffers of France are running dry. And though we hope to gain from this alliance, the people will soon ask, what was it all for? Was it worth the cost? The cost indeed was high. France's involvement in the American War of Independence had drained its treasury. The country was already facing financial difficulties due to decades of lavish spending by the monarchy, particularly under Louis XV. The war accelerated France's economic decline, plunging it into a deep financial crisis. Financial ruin. The price of freedom. By the early 1780s, France's economy was in freefall. The debt accumulated from financing the American war effort had reached staggering levels, and the government was borrowing heavily to meet its expenses. The fiscal crisis was exacerbated by France's regressive tax system. The nobility and clergy, who controlled vast wealth, were largely exempt from taxes, while the common people, the Third Estate, shouldered the burden. In a desperate attempt to address the financial crisis, King Louis XVI's government implemented new taxes. However, these measures were deeply unpopular and met with widespread resistance. The nobility, entrenched in privilege, refused to pay more, and the common people, already struggling under heavy taxation, became increasingly restless. Diary entry of a Parisian baker. June 1788. We cannot go on like this. The price of bread rises by the day, but my wages remain the same. My family goes hungry while the king and his court feast at Versailles. I hear rumors that it is because of a war fought far away, across the ocean for the freedom of some Americans. But what of our freedom? What of our liberty? How can we bear this any longer? The economic hardship faced by ordinary French citizens was compounded by food shortages and rising prices, especially of bread, which was the staple diet for most people. By 1789, the situation had become unbearable for many. The French people, emboldened by the success of the American Revolution and angered by the corruption and excesses of the monarchy, began to demand change. The spark of revolution, a dream of liberty. The ideas of the Enlightenment, philosophical ideals of equality, democracy, and human rights, have been circulating in French intellectual circles for decades. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu had criticized the absolutist monarchy and the rigid social hierarchy that defined French society. These ideas found fertile ground in the aftermath of the American Revolution. The American victory demonstrated that it was possible for a people to rise up against a powerful monarchy and establish a republic based on the principles of freedom and equality. For many in France, especially the growing middle class, the bourgeoisie, the American example was a source of hope and inspiration. Letter from Jean-Paul Marat to a fellow revolutionary. February 1789. The winds of liberty blow across the Atlantic, and they carry with them a message. The time for tyranny is over. The success of the Americans proves that kings can be brought down, that a people can govern themselves. We must take up the cause of freedom here in France. We must fight for our rights, for our equality, for our dignity. The financial crisis reached a breaking point in 1789 when King Louis XVI, unable to solve the country's problems through traditional means, called the Estates General a representative assembly for the first time in over a century. What was meant to be a solution to the fiscal crisis quickly turned into a confrontation between the monarchy and the people. The representatives of the Third Estate, frustrated by their lack of power and the king's refusal to enact meaningful reforms, declared themselves the National Assembly. This act of defiance marked the beginning of the French Revolution, the collapse of the monarchy. In the months that followed, France descended into chaos. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, became a symbol of the people's revolt against tyranny. Across the country, peasants rose up against their landlords, and revolutionary fervor spread like wildfire. The monarchy, weakened by its financial ruin and unable to contain the unrest, collapsed. By 1792, the French Revolution had overthrown the monarchy, and King Louis XVI was arrested. The ideals of the American Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, became the rallying cry of the revolutionaries. The following year, in January 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine, marking the end of the French monarchy. Conclusion: a tale of unintended consequences. The American War of Independence, while seemingly a distant conflict, had profound and unintended consequences for France. What began as a strategic move to weaken Britain and restore France's prestige on the world stage ended up destroying the French monarchy itself. The financial strain of the war, coupled with the revolutionary ideals it inspired, set the stage for the French Revolution, a cataclysmic event that would reshape not only France, but the entire world. The story of how the American Revolution destroyed the French monarchy is a reminder of the interconnectedness of history. A war fought across the Atlantic for the ideals of freedom and democracy helped ignite a revolution in the heart of Europe, leading to the downfall of one of the world's oldest and most powerful monarchies and the birth of a new era of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The long road to financial collapse. As France was entangled in the war effort on behalf of the American colonies, the French monarchy found itself buried beneath an avalanche of debt. King Louis XVI, not an inherently cruel monarch, but rather one who sought to uphold the tradition of royal grandeur, had not initially intended for his country to spiral into such financial ruin. Yet decisions made by his predecessors, as well as the extravagant costs of the war, meant that by the time he ascended the throne in 1774, the royal treasury was already stretched to its breaking point. When Louis took the throne, he inherited an economy already teetering on the edge of disaster. French financial management, dominated by an entrenched aristocracy that largely exempted itself from taxes, was riddled with corruption. King Louis, surrounded by his court, was disconnected from the everyday struggles of his people. In an effort to raise revenue, Louis appointed financial ministers such as Jacques Necker, who attempted reforms, including asking the nobility to bear some of the tax burden. However, these attempts were met with fierce resistance from the privileged classes, leading to the constant oscillation between brief attempts at reform and continued reliance on old systems that benefited the rich. Meanwhile, the taxes on the poor continued to rise. By 1780, the French debt had escalated beyond anything the monarchy could control. The French government's annual interest payments on its national debt were becoming the largest single expenditure, eclipsing even military spending. Anecdote from a noblewoman at Versailles. Diary, 1781. The court is abuzz with talk of the Americans and their great triumphs. There is an energy here in the halls of Versailles, but I fear it is not directed in the right places. I overheard Madame de Polignac discussing the new dress she plans to wear to the upcoming ball, and I cannot help but feel a pang of guilt. My people starve, and yet here we sit, surrounded by luxuries that are unsustainable. I hear whispers that the king is hesitant to call the Estates General. He is afraid to confront the debts that may ruin us all. The resistance from France's nobility was not just about money, but about the slow erosion of their privileges, many of which were intertwined with the monarchy. The nobility had enjoyed centuries of exemptions from taxes, vast landholdings, and influence at the royal court. The French Revolution, however, would signal an end to these privileges. Diary entry of a Parisian merchant. March 1789. The streets are filled with whispers of revolt. The peasants have had enough. They are angry at the taxes, the high cost of bread, the demands placed on them by the nobles. I overheard a man on the street the other day talking about the ideals of the Americans. He says they fought for freedom, equality. They say we too must fight. What is it we are fighting for, though? The only thing that I know is that we cannot survive this way much longer. By the time Louis XVI reluctantly called the Estates General in 1789, the stage was set for the downfall of his regime. It was a gamble, one that he hoped would address France's fiscal crisis by redistributing the financial burden more fairly. However, the calling of the Estates General only exacerbated the tensions between the monarchy and the people. In a turn of fate, the Estates General did not produce the royal revival Louis had hoped for. The Third Estate, consisting largely of the commoners and the burgeoning bourgeoisie, was outvoted at every turn by the more privileged First and Second Estates, the clergy and nobility. In frustration, the Third Estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly and vowed not to disband until a new constitution had been drafted. The king's response was initially to lock the doors of the meeting hall, hoping to curb the rebellion. But the members of the National Assembly had no intention of yielding. They gathered at a nearby tennis court and swore the famous tennis court oath, vowing not to separate until the monarchy had conceded to their demands for reform. This marked the beginning of the French Revolution. The monarchy's refusal to meet the demands for reform from the lower classes, coupled with the failure to address the dire financial situation, led to a breakdown in trust between the king and his subjects. For the first time, Louis XVI found himself a figurehead, unable to command the loyalty of his people. Anecdote from Marie Antoinette. Memoirs 1789. The people are restless, and I fear that things are beyond our control. I hear the cries of bread, bread, from the streets, but there is no bread to give. How do we come to this? How do we go from the most glorious court in Europe to being a nation on the brink of revolt? I have no answers, only doubts. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, often symbolized the excesses of the monarchy. Her infamous and incorrect comment, "Let them eat cake," became emblematic of the callousness attributed to her and the royal family. Though there is no historical evidence that she actually said this, the phrase captured the perception of the royal court as disconnected and indifferent to the suffering of the common people. The storming of the Bastille, a symbol of rebellion. The first major flashpoint in the revolution occurred on July 14, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille, a royal prison in Paris that had come to symbolize tyranny and oppression. Armed with little more than pitchforks, a large group of Parisians descended on the fortress, demanding the release of political prisoners and the surrender of weapons stored within. The fall of the Bastille was a resounding victory for the revolutionaries, symbolizing the defeat of royal authority and the triumph of the people's will. This event captured the imagination of the French populace and sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The king's decision to deploy troops around Paris in an attempt to quash the rebellion only escalated the situation, further alienating the monarchy from the people. Reminiscence from a revolutionary leader. Letter from Georges Danton to Camille Desmoulins. July 1789. The Bastille is ours. The people have risen, and the king cannot stop us now. It is as though a fire has been lit within our hearts, a fire that will not die until we have true liberty, equality, and fraternity. There is no turning back. This is our moment. For many revolutionaries, the fall of the Bastille was not just a symbolic victory. It was the beginning of a new France, one that would be free of royal oppression. As the revolution gathered momentum, France's monarchy found itself on the defensive, fighting to hold on to the remnants of its power. The execution of Louis XVI, the final blow. By 1792, France was embroiled in a full-scale revolution. The National Convention, dominated by the radical Jacobins, abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic. In January 1793, King Louis XVI was tried for treason and found guilty. He was sentenced to death by guillotine, and on January 21st, he was executed in the Place de la Concorde. His death marked the definitive end of the Bourbon monarchy in France and solidified the rise of the revolutionary ideals. Diary entry of an ordinary citizen. January 21st, 1793. The king is dead. It is done. The streets are filled with cries of joy, but my heart is heavy. The monarchy is gone, but I wonder what comes next. The revolution promises liberty, but at what cost? How many lives will be lost in the name of freedom? The world is changing, and I am afraid. Louis XVI's execution, though a monumental act of revolutionary defiance, also marked the beginning of a period of intense political instability, culminating in the Reign of Terror, led by figures like Robespierre. In the name of protecting the revolution, thousands would be executed as enemies of the state, many of them innocent. Conclusion: a legacy of unintended consequences. The American Revolution had provided the spark of inspiration for France's own revolutionary fire, but it was the dire financial crises, the inequities in French society, and the monarchy's inability to reform that would ultimately lead to the French Revolution. The French monarchy, having borrowed too much, wasted too much, and failed to listen to its people, was unable to contain the revolutionary wave it had helped ignite. Louis XVI's decision to support the American cause, though motivated by strategic interests, set in motion a series of events that led to the collapse of the monarchy and the birth of a new political order. As France descended into revolution, the echoes of America's fight for freedom resonated across the Atlantic, a testament to the powerful and unforeseen consequences of one revolution inspiring another. This is the story of how the American War of Independence, though a success for the colonists, indirectly led to the downfall of a monarchy and set the stage for the rise of a republic. A republic born of the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but also of blood and chaos. 1789, with the storming of the Bastille, a symbol of the monarchy's power and oppression. The prison, which had been used to house political prisoners, became the target of the angry mob, who saw it as a representation of the monarchy's tyranny. As the news spread, revolutionaries seized arms and ammunition from the Bastille, signaling the beginning of widespread unrest. The fall of the Bastille was not just the release of prisoners, but also a profound statement. The French people would no longer be subjugated by an oppressive regime. Anecdote from a Parisian revolutionary July 14, 1789, "We've done it. The Bastille, the symbol of oppression, is ours. The people have risen, and the king cannot stop us now." I hear the cries of victory, but they are not just for today. They are for our future, our liberty, our equality. We will never be silenced again. The storming of the Bastille was a pivotal moment in the revolution, but it was only the beginning of the deeper and more far-reaching changes that would soon engulf France. As revolutionary fervor swept across the country, the monarchy's authority weakened further. On August 4, 1789, the National Assembly abolished the feudal system, ending centuries of noble privileges and marking the first major step in dismantling the old regime. Anecdote from an aristocrat's diary, August 1789, "The National Assembly has declared the end of the privileges of the nobility. What remains for us? We have lost everything. The lands, the titles, the respect. All of it is gone. It is as though we are no longer even French. I do not know where we will go, but the world has changed forever." The collapse of the monarchy had only begun. By September 1792, the monarchy was officially abolished, and France became a republic. King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were imprisoned, and their fates sealed. The king, who had once been seen as a symbol of divine right and royal authority, was put on trial and executed by guillotine in January 1793. The Queen, too, met her tragic end later that year. Diary entry of a revolutionary January 21, 1793. "We watched as Louis XVI was led to the guillotine. The king, once untouchable, is now nothing more than a man. It was necessary. He was a symbol of the old tyranny. But I cannot help but feel sorrow. His fate is a mirror of our own. We too are prisoners of this revolution, of these ideas. Where will it all end?" The execution of Louis XVI did not bring an end to the chaos. Rather, it deepened it. The subsequent years of the French Revolution saw intense political conflict, the rise of radical factions, and the reign of terror, a period marked by widespread executions. The revolutionaries, driven by a desire to secure the fruits of liberty and equality, descended into violent extremism as they grappled with how to establish their new republic. The American War of Independence, though not directly responsible for the downfall of the French monarchy, set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. The economic strain of supporting the American cause, coupled with the ideological influence of the revolutionaries in the American colonies, brought France to the brink. The American Revolution had demonstrated that it was possible to topple an old, entrenched order, and the French people, inspired by those ideals, demanded nothing less than the same for themselves. Anecdote from a revolutionary soldier, 1793. "The dream of liberty that the Americans fought for is now our own. But I fear the cost is too great. We have lost our king, but we have also lost our humanity. We have become the very tyrants we swore to overthrow. I only hope that, when this is over, we will find a way to live in peace." In the end, the French Revolution proved that revolutions are not only about overthrowing rulers. They are about the deeper, often more painful process of reshaping society itself. The French monarchy, once one of the most powerful in Europe, was irreversibly changed by the ideals of liberty and equality that had inspired the American Revolution. The events set in motion by the American victory over Britain ultimately led to the destruction of an ancient regime, leaving in its place a republic built on new principles. but not without the scars of violence and division that would continue to shape France for decades. As the French Revolution unfolded, it was clear that the repercussions of the American War of Independence had reverberated across the Atlantic, and the French monarchy's downfall was just one example of how history, once set in motion, could not be easily contained. It was a stark reminder that the fight for liberty, once begun, often comes at an enormous cost, and that no institution, no matter how powerful, is immune to the winds of change. If you're enjoying this story, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue creating content that educates and empowers. To learn more about South Africa's leading accessibility software and to support our dyslexic-friendly initiative, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za. Drop a comment if you want more information. Thank you for watching this video.